Hello, everybody. Here with my great friend, Moni Simeonov. He's a fantastic violinist. He's a faculty at Bob Cole University and Bob Cole Conservatory and at Colburn School of Music in California. Welcome. Thanks for joining me, man.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and Moni's a veteran of the interwebs. His Instagram is quite awesome. Somehow you've found a way to make it entertaining and educational, and I'm still working on that. People say that I'm kind of like very cold or kind of dry in my videos, and in reality, I'm kind of a very silly person, I think.
I think so too. Your videos are always so informative, though. I remember watching them for years before I ever actually met you. My students turned me onto your videos a long time ago.
Oh my God. Yeah, that was actually a COVID project. YouTube just told me that my channel is 18 years old, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's hard because when I do these videos, I get into such a serious mode where I'm multitasking, not like this stream, and it's very hard to turn on some sort of personality.
Yeah. It's true. Sometimes we just need to get the information out, right? We need to do what we're there to do and get to the point, and then let people go on with their days.
That's what I think. But then, I see people who are not informative, let's say, but are able to turn on the personality on the camera, and they do pretty well. So different audience, maybe. Yeah, so we got people in the chat. Hello, everybody. We will be looking at questions and discussion topics. I have definitely a few things I want to ask you. And maybe we could start with just something I've been thinking about and something that I know you think quite a bit about, and that's just how we make progress and how we measure progress. I know you work a lot with kind of mindset and how you spend your time. And I think inevitably part of that is just, okay, well, how do you measure what happened and whether it was successful, aside from, in the moment it was in tune, or, I did it 10 times in a row and it was good. Like more macro level, how do you go about measuring could be, would be success or progress?
Yeah. I think that we intend to measure the things that we care about, but we end up caring about only the things that we can easily measure, which tend to be different things. For example, we may want to measure beauty, sound quality, style, but those are not easy to measure, and that's why, although we care about them a lot, we end up measuring things that are a lot simpler than that. For example, how loud the sound is, or how fast the tempo is, or how impressed our classmate seems to be with this performance, or even more macro level, how many followers someone has, or how many likes a video has. Those kinds of things are so easy to measure, and we tend to we don't start out caring about these kinds of things, but they end up becoming top of mind because they're so easy to measure, because it's a simple number. And of course, measuring is really important because, I've been running, let's say, for the last, I don't know how many years, maybe 20 years. And I have an app on my phone. No matter which one I use, it's always the same thing. And there are thousands of runs now on this app that have been recorded. And I can look back and see progress. It's not measuring from 1 month to the next, but measuring from 1 year to the next, from 1 decade to the next. And then you can really see whether you've been making progress, whether you've plateaued a while ago, or whether things are deteriorating. And that serves as a powerful motivator to be able to measure things. So I would just say that it's really dangerous to use subjectivity as a measuring unit, and this is what we would do if we had nothing else. We would simply feel good about one day's playing and bad about another day's playing, and that usually has very little to do with the playing, but has a lot to do with our general feelings about life. And we may, I mean, that subjectivity heavily polarizes our opinion. If you are feeling good about something, maybe the playing may not be the playing, you may oversell your own skill on that day. Or if you're feeling bad about whatever you're feeling, then you're going to tend to think that you sounded much worse than you actually did. And I think that all of us here, whoever's listening, and definitely the two of us have experienced this, where you finish a concert and you say, wow, this did not go very well. And then a bunch of people come and tell you, oh my God, this is wonderful. And then you hear the recording and you don't actually hear all the mistakes that you thought you made, because something was very heavy in your mind when you were playing. You thought that there was an avalanche of mistakes, and there actually wasn't, because your autopilot kind of carried you forward and you did all the right things that you had been practicing to do. And so the recording seems to be one solid measure of progress. And is it easier to record ourselves nowadays? Yeah, totally. Like when you and I were in school, it was a little bit more difficult, especially when I was in school, because I'm older than you are. And we had to get a cassette player. That's for those of you who are younger. This is an outdated technology that our ancestors used to use.
It's coming back. It's coming back.
It took a while. It's coming back, it is. So you had to, it was a commitment to record yourself and then to listen, and the recording quality was not great. Now you can get one of these and just record yourself whenever you feel like it. And do people record themselves more now? I actually don't think so. Judging from my students, they don't record themselves that much more often. And there is a reason for it. And I think we just don't like to look in the mirror as often as we like to imagine what we may sound or look like. So I think recording is definitely a solid measure of progress. But what do you think about, like, how do you measure your progress and your students' progress?
Yeah, well, I mean, just kind of picking up on what you said about recording, it's interesting, like, and I think this speaks to a broader point about just how lucky we are to have so many resources and tools and just things that were not readily available even 10 years ago, let alone 20 or 30. And forgot who wrote the book, but it's called Dreadful Freedom. And there's this kind of oversaturation of potential that's almost debilitating. And so, yeah, I can go, and I'm guilty of this. I don't really record my practice as much as I should. Probably because I'm sick of listening to myself after having, recorded 3 albums and having to go through the process of editing. I mean, it's just, you go insane. But I think, I don't know, I feel like I know what I'm going to sound like. I've gotten to the point where I know what I'm going to sound like on the recording. And I feel like I've done enough of that sort of work that I can kind of estimate in the moment. And that's something I've been trying to build for a long time, to like really hear myself. Because at the very beginning, when I started the violin very late, and it was a lot of raw talent at the moment, and I just had no idea what I was doing, but I was in love with the instrument, and I would just play all the time. And sometimes I thought I did something that sounded so good, once in a while. And maybe I did. I had these moments where even I didn't know what I was doing. I had Heifetz Chrysler in my ear, and I was able to like maybe jerry rig some kind of great sound for a moment, or some great arpeggio, you just nail it just once. Don't need to do it like 10 times, just one time for yourself. So, there's such an illusory quality to it as well, just how we hear ourselves, and recording is great for that. But, having started there with the illusion that, oh yeah, like I can do something great, but then when I have to do it on stage, like it wouldn't work so well. And so, okay, now we have a problem. And that's where all the work started. And I feel like I'm at the point where I can do it without recording, but sometimes even that fails. And, I have these illusions if something was good or it was bad, and it's the opposite. So yeah, that's very interesting. But yeah, but progress more in general. Yeah, I feel like there's this kind of bell curve, or it's not even a bell curve. It's like it's a bell curve. Like at one end you have beginners, and at one end you have like level 100, and then everything else is in between, and all the complexity is in between. And you start with simplicity and ignorance, and then you end with simplicity, but it's not ignorant. It's kind of carved into a beautiful statue, but it's very simple. And you've arrived at some sort of simple truths about what you sound like, and whether you are good or not. Have you made progress? All these things. There's a million ways to measure it, but I don't know. I feel like I'm always trying to find the simplest ways, and maybe it's just another way of saying I'm lazy. I don't know. Someone's asking if you're a black belt.
No.
No?
Perfect.
With most people, I'd ask them to prove that they're a black belt. With you, I'm going to ask you to prove that you're not. I don't know.
But I agree with the idea of the bell curve that you described, and in one more sense as well. I think when we teach beginners and when we were beginners, we did all these exercises. The simple shifting exercise from first to third position, or vibrato exercises, or just dropping the fingers correctly, having straight bow. And then, like these simple vibrato exercises, we stopped doing them. Once you're in high school and once you think that you're in a good conservatory, you're like, why should I practice vibrato anymore? I'm not a beginner. I know how to do vibrato. Look at my vibrato. But then you see that at the level 100, people maintain their vibrato because it is very important. It's they say that the better your vehicle is, the farther you're going to have to walk back when it fails, right? So I think that people really do try to maintain, people at the highest level do try to maintain their basic technical skills, because it's not just that they need to be consistent on stage, 150 times a year, but they also need to, these technical tools need to serve as a vessel for their personality to fully come out. And if there is a slight roadblock here and there, the character is not going to ring through the instrument. So I think that, in the middle, there are quite a few people who just think that they're too good for school. Or
that they're terrible. Or they think they're terrible, but they're actually good. There's this misalignment. So you have like total confidence at the start, like through ignorance, or maybe once in a while it's warranted. And then you have like total misalignment and the search, the quest, and then at the end you have there is no end, but you meet people who are, and I think you are one of them, that's kind of pared down many things that could have been overly complex. I'm sure you're in the process of continually doing that and arriving at some sort of simplicity where it's just like everything is integrated, like a sound, intonation and left-hand technique, and like all these parameters are now one thing. There's like a composite of one thing, and you're no longer like trying to a little more bow speed, a little more this. It's like it happens because of intention and experience. But yeah,
that's it. I think when we're learning a new skill, at our age, we've learned a lot of the skills that we think we may need, but every once in a while it's fun to learn a new hobby, or for some people who don't know how to do it, how to drive stick shifter. And learning how to drive, and I did that at a later age in my life. At first it was a very complex experience with a lot of moving parts, and I had to take care of each one of them, and I felt like there were too many plates to spin. But eventually it becomes just one thing of simply paying attention. And then so when you're paying attention, that encompasses all of these other things. For example, in terms of violin playing, eventually it becomes just an act of listening, just a simple exercise of oral skills. And then when you're listening, then hands will fall where they fall, shoulders will relax the way they should, and even the style will kick in, as long as you continue to listen. But these things do have to take, you do have to take individual care of these things beforehand until they become somewhat automated and a part of this big conglomerate of movements and posture.
Yeah. Okay, let me be a good host and look at some of our friends in the chat. One Thick Bagel. I love these names, by the way. Someone whose name is just Viola. Hi from SoCal, learning Bach double. All right. Anne, our dear friend, is here. She's from Munich, working on Mendelssohn E minor, first movement. Good stuff. And a beautiful Franck sonata and some other goodies. Let's see. Yeah, our friend Jack is here.
Oh, Jack,
he said, "Nice."
how's he doing?
Yeah, he's good. He said, "Nice violin, Danny." So this is actually Jack's violin. It's mine now. We did a little swap coordination. You know, when your student has one of the best violins you've ever tried, you're not upset when it's, lands in your lap just randomly. But yes, and we have Jay Moran from Stockholm. And Aubrey is here. Okay, let's get to a question, and I'll try to get through everything here. But Aubrey asks, how does memory and memorization affect Aubrey, English, your overall thoughts on technique and security? How does memory and memorization affect thoughts on technique and security? Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I love memorizing pieces, and
I'm so bad at it.
I try to make.
I used to do it all the time.
No. Yeah, I know. But people say that it gets worse with age. I haven't felt that yet. I'm still
Oh, it's just a choice.
so that I can tackle it. Is it? I hope so. Yeah, I think that memorization should provide much greater technical security because you simply have more of your senses left to pay attention to the right things. I mean, there are so many neurons devoted to the visual intake that when we focus on them, I mean, there's something like 90% of the neurons are devoted to whatever you see, and the rest is spread through the other senses. And so I think that once we divorce ourselves from the music, we are much more able to feel and hear, predict if necessary, and definitely listen, the most important thing. I don't know if you've ever done any reading with like friends of yours who are actors. Living in LA, I have some actor friends, and I've helped them, read through lines and stuff. It is very, very different when someone just has a thing in front of them and they read and they say the same stuff. They can try to infuse it with wonderful emotion and all the correct inflections. It doesn't work because we're not used to communicating with a sheet of paper in front of us. We spend most of the time that we spend in communication with others. It is one-on-one, and it is with no script in hand. We're just improvising a conversation. And so even when that conversation is not improvised but is memorized, it still helps quite a bit that there is no barrier between the listener and the speaker, because conversation is how I guess it would be very different if we just walked around on the street and read out of sheet of papers, and then we would then be much better accustomed to playing by by memory but by
Do you think
music.
because of modernity that there is like that aspect of human interaction is now more prevalent, like there are more people that for whom that is more normal, like looking at a screen, let's say, as a stand-in for a piece of paper, as opposed to having a conversation with a person. Like, I wonder sometimes if we've gotten a lot better at that, for better or worse.
You may be right. You may be right. But I think that there are too many years of evolution that have made it a lot more enjoyable, at least a lot more interesting for us to relish in this spontaneity of interacting on the go and not when it's planned and scripted and read off paper for sure. So I think, when we're reading a piece of music for the very first time, we're literally reading every single note, unless there is a scale-like passage and then some sort of habit kicks in. But so the very first minute, very first day of learning a piece, we're reading every single note. Now, a week later, you're still playing it using music, but you're no longer reading every single note. Now you see certain patterns that they trigger a passage, they trigger a melody. And then a month later, you may not be using the music the way you used it before at all. You maybe just looking at the contour of the line.
Right.
Maybe 6 months later, you're still looking at the music, but now you're not even reading certain phrases. You're only using the music so that you can remember whether you're in the recap or you're still in the exposition. And so I think that we are memorizing, whether we like it or not, we are memorizing at every single day of practicing the piece. So why not at least get all the way to the end of it so that we no longer need the music, you know?
This is a very, I think you present a very optimistic version of that in some sense. And I'll present the pessimistic version, which is that I think a lot of people look at music like kind of pathologically, like they're literally not looking at anything. They're not getting any information from it. It's just kind of like a comfort blanket or just a habit. Like I have this with some of my students, like we're talking about all sorts of, technical details. We're digging into it. And I asked them to play a passage for like the 10th time, and they look at the music. It's like, sorry, there's nothing there for you. Like, first of all, we're doing technique. Like, look somewhere else, please, anywhere. not at the music. But also, you're not getting anything from it. So I think there is, and I'm guilty of that as well. Like, I don't know, when you get used to playing with music, there's some kind of comfort with it. Like, yeah, I could just play it memorized as well. But yeah. No, that's something I've been doing more of. I've been trying to memorize more because it's somehow there's a freeing effect to it. I feel like the music keeps us very organized, potentially, especially if you're all over the place kind of person. And I think I was more all over the place than I am now. And so I think I'm ready to go the opposite direction, let the pendulum swing back to memorization. Like I used to memorize everything in school. I had Russian teacher and it was just how it was. And I feel like I missed a lot of the music just because I got used to memorizing. And there's a lot of interesting like score analysis and a lot of even things that are on the page that I didn't think twice about. And then you just never look at it again. So I guess you can have these extremes in both directions.
Yeah. And we should also talk a little bit about the issue of how memorizing, or at least how performing by memory can amplify stage fright. Because some people will, as freeing as it could be to play by memory, if you do have to play by memory and you don't feel comfortable with it, it's likely that you will also start doubting all kinds of other things, or at least this thing, the memory will be so heavy on your mind that you won't be able to focus on expressing, communicating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I like to think of 5 pillars of memory. 3 of them are very obvious, and I think that we should know which ones come most naturally to us so that we can work on the other ones. But there is the visual, and this is in no particular order. There is the visual, there is the auditory, and the tactile, right? So to me, the auditory is the strongest. I was wearing very thick glasses when I was little, and I often just took them off. So I started memorizing very early, just so that I didn't have to, wear my glasses. They were very heavy too, Bulgarian glasses. So these three pillars, the visual, some people have nearly photographic memory. I don't know if this actually exists as a concept, and it's a little misunderstood, but some people remember things on the page very, very well. They can tell you exactly where they're on the page when they're playing. Some people are better remembering melodies. Lots of the young Suzuki players do exactly that even before they start reading, and I think it's a very natural thing to excel at. And some people are very good at feeling where each finger goes. If you take a violinist and you have them play that piece on the viola, they will have no problem with it, even though it's a fifth lower, Or if you tell them start this thing in second position as opposed to third position, they will play the whole thing a step down. So in addition to those two pillars, perhaps we can talk about the structure of the piece, like knowing where you are, because sometimes, especially with fugues and longer movements, it can be problematic. You can, like Super Mario, you can get into the wrong pipe and then come back from the beginning of the fugue, and then a vicious cycle where it never ends. And then we can
Or
also
you
talk about
play the shortest Bach chaconne in history. Just go right to the end.
2 lines and a half.
That's
and
right.
you can talk about the harmony. Violinists don't think of harmony as often as we think of melody and just being able to play well in tune, but having good sense for what the underlying harmony is underneath the melody will also give a more solid idea of how that melody functions, rather than just memorizing the contour of the melody, the intervals of the melody, the rhythm. You memorize what holds it underneath in terms of supporting harmony. So I think if each person realizes what's good with them, for example, if my auditory is not doing very well and I want to get better at it, I will try to play a piece by memory, or at least a part of a piece by memory, while listening to something else in my earphones.
See,
So
this is where your masochistic side comes out.
No, this is practical.
Okay.
And if my visual is not great, I will try to write out the piece so that I can start connecting what I feel here with what it should look like on the page. And yeah, it may be strenuous for these exercises to even exist, but when you were in school, you were memorizing with ease, most often because you probably didn't have deadlines, right? You could practice as much as you want, and then kind of a natural progression of knowing the piece is to also have memorized it. But sometimes, especially in the professional world, we have very strict deadlines. If you have to play a concerto in July, then that means you have to have memorized it by March. You can't memorize it 2 weeks before the performance. And so these deadlines kind of necessitate something that's more rigorous than simply let me play it until I know it by memory, which is a great luxury that a lot of students do have.
Mm-hmm. How much of that is innate? You mentioned these pillars. I can imagine for any one of them that the underlying skills could be learned to some degree, and they could also be innate. Like I know somebody, there's no way they learned how to do this. Like they fall into, at least 4 of the 5 you mentioned. My friend Eric Silberger, actually, he's kind of like a savant, and like he can play anything and memorize all kinds of things. And like, I don't think he spent 10 years in a room training himself. Like there's so much of it is related to innate abilities. And I don't know, are you more on the side of like, if you have a certain amount of time and effort and energy, do you strengthen your strengths or do you shore up weaknesses? Like what do you think holds more priority, or do you try to just always juggle both?
Such a good question. I think there is time when we build and there is time when we enjoy. And I'm still in the time of building, at least I feel so. And whatever weaknesses I do have, and plenty, I try to tackle them one by one. And I think that most students should do that. And of course, eventually you have to recognize, oh, for example, I'm not great at playing Mozart, but Brahms I play so well, so maybe record the Brahms rather than the Mozart concertos, right? And that is a very practical thing to do. But we should reserve some time, even if you are in the period of strengthening the strengths, we should reserve some time for tackling the weaknesses, even if it's only for psychological satisfaction, so that we don't feel like there is some sort of dark room in the house and I never go in there because I don't know what's growing behind those doors, you know.
Yeah. And is that something you would do simultaneously? Or is it like in terms of just, you know, in one day you'd work on strengths and you'd also work on weaknesses? Or can it be something that's, you know, maybe you have a month of strengths and a month of weakness, like things coming in waves? Like I more appreciate things in waves these days. I used to be into multitasking, and I'm very much kind of against it now, and I do it only when I have to. And I love just the saturation.
Yeah. Well, this is to relate this into something that maybe some of the viewers understand well. It's in the world of muscle building, there's always bulking and then cutting. So
I do neither.
Bulking, yeah, okay. Technically, we do both in one day if we don't make it a priority to just do one or the other. So in the bulking period, you eat a lot of food and then you lift very heavy weights. And then in the cutting period, you eat under the caloric the caloric need, and you lift slightly less heavy weights. So you can get from 170 pounds to 200 pounds within a few months. And then after that, you will go back to maybe 180, but that 180 will be a lot more full of muscle than it was just 2 months ago. So this is how they do it at a very professional level. Of course, most of us don't do this, but I think as violinists, I think you're right that we should be focusing on one thing, really get into the habit of everything that it takes to achieve that one thing, and then focus on something else and then see how that feels. Because otherwise it's too easy to switch tasks and only focus on what feels easy in the moment. And that doesn't really train much. That just is life as usual.
Yeah. I mean, there's also these productivity hacks, so to speak, that float around. And I don't know if I've done this with violin, but I've done this with other things where, you know, you set a very, very small amount of maximum time for a task, and then you switch to another task, or maybe even randomizing. I think that stuff has very, very limited utility. It's hard to do deep work. You can't hack deep work. I mean, it's just, I don't know. Can you?
I haven't been able to. Probably people do it, but maybe they just get lucky. I do think that deep work is important, and I think that deep work makes you feel like you've actually done something. On the other side, there is just stress and anxiety when you're switching from one thing to another. You answer emails for 10 minutes, and then you answer phone calls for 15 minutes, and then you practice for 10 minutes. You do neither of each. I mean, what do they call it in psychology? It's attention residue, where you still have the echoes of the previous task bothering the current task. And I think that you do have to get through some sort of, when you're doing the so-called deep work, right? Whether it's you're trying to learn a difficult piece and or you're trying to understand complicated text maybe in a different language, you hit some sort of a roadblock. And that's usually at the time when, if left to your own devices, you would switch tasks. Because that feels like, well, that now it's a natural time to go and get boba tea, right? But this is exactly the time when you should persevere and try to get through the other side, because you're going to get to this roadblock every day if you don't handle it today.
Yeah, I guess you can get to a place where you're convincing yourself that this roadblock just means I need to go on and I need to switch gears and do something else. And maybe there is some merit in that sometimes, but yeah, we're very prone to kind of pathology, and like anything left unexamined starts to kind of eat away at potential. And
True.
yeah, we have some comments here. Sorry, I'm not speaking them out loud, but I am reading them. Anya Tse says, I use colors to memorize. I use different colors for different phrases and the same color for the same phrase, for example. Yeah, I can't say I've ever done that, but I think there's people that really think and feel in colors more than others. That's very interesting.
I see my younger students using a lot more. My younger students are using a lot more colors, and especially now with the iPads, it's definitely yeah.
So not just imagining, like actually in your score marking, like making a kind of.
Oh yeah, it's possible. You can highlight it so that it's with low transparency, but with I think that if Western notation were to perk up today, as opposed to whenever it did, a few hundred years ago, it would be very different. It would be much easier to read. It would probably have a lower threshold of acceptance and comprehension that even people who don't know music should be able to learn to read it quickly. But there will be things, I think, there would be things that would make it easy to memorize. And I think colors would be that. And the only reason why we don't really have colors in staff notation is because it was impossible back in the in the day for them to create easily different colors ink. But now that we have, it's becoming one of those things. Why is the contemporary keyboard set up the way it is, right? That's a very old thing that was supposed to slow us down when we used typewriters, and it would be much faster if it was set up differently now, and I think some people do set it up differently if they have to type very fast. But it's one of those things that just never changed because there is never a good time to change it, right? You can just include a letter here and a letter there. But I think that what people are doing with color coding when they're marking up their music, and especially as Anya is saying, it helps you memorize. Anything that helps you memorize, even if it's not universally codified.
Yeah, it's one thing for memory. I know people that mark their score quite a bit with all kinds of things, whether it's like explicit directions or colors, or it gets quite messy sometimes. I'm sure you've seen some of those. And it makes me wonder about like the value of abstraction. And I don't know, is there something magical about the limits of notation that can obviously be numerated? You can list them out very easily. Like high abstraction versus high content. Like, yes, you can design notation that would be very high content and very low barrier to entry. And yeah, I don't know. Is that notation, is all of our music that we love a result of these sort of somewhat artificial limitations at this point, at least? It's getting too philosophical.
Never thought about that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just a bunch of nonsense, Moni. That's what that is. Let's take some questions. Sangyun Ryu asks if there are any good music learning apps that we could recommend. He or she is a self-learning violinist here. Aren't we self-learning violinists too? Yeah. No, don't know about that. Apps. I don't know if there's an app that would necessarily. There's probably some adjacent things, but for self-learning in general, I guess the question is if there's something that can replace a teacher, at least to some degree. I don't know. What do you think has been like the strongest set of tools that help someone who doesn't have a teacher? I don't know. What do you need, and is it even feasible?
I think this it's a combination of things, but if I had to just pick one, it would probably be YouTube. And I feel sorry to say so, because YouTube is can be a source of a lot of distraction as well. But
Yeah.
if you do want to learn pieces, you can go there and see so many different recordings. You wouldn't know how to sift through them, because some of them will be great, some of them won't. Some of them will have great sound quality, but not great playing quality. But at least it gives you a lot of access. And then also just recording yourself. I think the cell phone, especially in airplane mode, can be really, really useful, because it has...
But how do you look
has a tuner,
YouTube in airplane mode? This is the problem.
No. So in general, when you're recording yourself, when you're using a metronome, a tuner, a note-taking app, a timer.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's any magical apps in that regard, except Tonebase, right? Let's see. Jay Moran asks, actually, when it comes to your entire left-hand positioning... Oh, wait, I think this is... earlier comment. Moni, just curious how you came about your position your left thumb the way you do. This is someone that clearly watches your content. You make some really interesting videos on these topics. Did teachers try to make you hold your thumb more traditionally, or was it your own choice, or it was suggested by an open-minded teacher? Yeah, maybe you can explain what that's all about with the left-hand thumb.
So I have a rather large hand. Actually, both of them are rather large, but the left one's a little bigger actually, and at least the fingers are longer. And my thumb is very short. And this is a particular condition. I think like 0.3% of the population have this condition, where the thumb is short and very stubby like this. Look at the nail even. Right. That's right. And it's not just that the thumb is short, but it also comes from down here. So I am very much like a primate. I was meant to just hang from trees. So that
I
is
love
an
that
activity that doesn't contribute to violin playing. So because of that, I can't really position it the way a normal thumb would. So for example, if I remember when I first came to the States, I played with a thumb that looked a lot more like this.
Yeah.
It was around the neck of the violin, and I can still play like this. It just makes it difficult for some passages. Then I tried to experiment to play with a thumb like this, that, a lot of, maybe another 50% of the violinists use. Like if you have like, James Ennis and Hilary Hahn and Heifetz and Perlman using thumbs like this, then you have, Midori and Kogan and plenty of other younger players using a thumb like this. I can't do this thumb because every time that I have a semitone between 1 and 2, the thumb will slip off. And I definitely don't want to use this thumb because I'm not feeling comfortable with the fourth finger with the thumb like this. At least I'm not. Many other people make it work wonderfully. So what I do is I want to have the convenience of having the tip of my thumb touch the neck of the violin underneath like this. But I have to curve it because if I straighten it, then I can't do a semitone between 1 and 2. So I put my thumb like this, I curve it, I'm thinking of an O or a C between my first finger and the thumb. And I just basically support the violin with that curved, ugly looking mushroom of a thumb. And it seems to work for my other fingers.
That's fascinating. I mean, have you ever met anyone that does this? I don't know anyone.
No, I haven't. I mean,
I know for people with short thumbs, it's like what you mentioned, like this, for people with short thumbs, they tend towards this, sometimes even there. But to do this, I've never seen that. And I guess thinking about it, there's no reason it shouldn't work. I mean, it's as long as there's no like a clenching happening, yeah.
Yeah, what I do is I don't use the thumb this way. I use the thumb this way. So it's the violin rests on the thumb like this.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but the violin is pushing the violin is bending my thumb as opposed to the thumb supporting the violin by going to the inside.
Right. So you could let go of the hand and the thumb would support.
Oh yeah. Yeah, kids, don't try this at home, please. This is, I mean, of course you should experiment, but don't experiment with anything specific in mind, especially not this, because it may not work for you, and I don't want you to. Sometimes people can dig themselves, and I know I've done this. You can dig yourself into a hole this way, and then all these wonderful things that were happening before are now not working, just because you're trying to make this one thing different. You know?
Welcome to complex systems. Well, I mean, that's such it's a good point that you raised about, not sacrificing all the other things by trying to fix one problem. And I think that's so common and getting back to the topic of self-learning, in my experience, this kind of pendulum swinging maybe too far to one side and then coming back. I mean, it was so crucial. And I've been, on many topics, I think I've crossed that threshold of like, okay, I've gone too far, and it's now at the expense of other things. But at the same time, I feel like I had to do that, and I had to, and this is, especially when you have a unique problem that no one else, you can't just kind of copy a solution from somebody. It's, it's I think a necessary thing, but then knowing when to swing back to normality or even to do the opposite and have the opposites battle themselves out. It's interesting. Yeah. Okay, we have some other questions here. Ted Case. You know Ted, right? Hi, Moni from one of your former USC residents. I have the same left hand thumb condition. Okay, we stand corrected. There is someone else. Maybe I'll experiment with that placement. Good.
Ted is a wonderful pianist. I don't remember the last time I heard him play, but he was,
he's a pianist.
He's RA at USC, yeah.
So he's going to apply this to piano playing. Interesting.
Yeah.
Here's one from Nicholas I'm so sorry. Papanagitu.
Greek?
I love Greek names. They're hard to say, but you feel like you've really accomplished something beautiful when you finally get it. He asks, what is the way to stop big fingers from touching more than one string? That's an interesting one. So I guess he means like, to play a B, but still have the adjacent strings untouched, or many such situations. Yeah. What do you think?
Well, let me get a pen. Do I have a pen? I don't have a pen. But if I had a pen, I would draw a line that's almost at the edge of the finger here, especially on the inside, so left of center. And that's where I would place my first finger. And having the first finger there will make many of the other fingers play on that same rib, because that allows you to go around and have enough, even with a big sausage like mine, right?
Is it like on the side here? I made an indent, something like that?
I believe that I can find a pen. Let me just, I'll look for a pen.
Yeah, before you get your pen, I guess Yeah, the idea of like flat finger versus like where exactly are you placing one?
This pen doesn't
Permanent.
seem to be working.
You need a Sharpie.
Oh, okay. So it is. Is it visible? It's not visible. Anyway, so you do have to be quite a bit on the side, and maybe the elbow coming around will help quite a bit as well. But being able to play on one string and not three at the same time is just a matter of practicing. And you know, sometimes you do need to get this part of the this part of the hand to not touch the neck of the violin, so that you can be more
Right.
vertical and less horizontal.
Yeah, I think a common scenario would be like, like you want to play E and you've played fourth finger D, and you know, how does that fourth finger place itself to not cover? I mean, something that one day I thought about and it kind of fixed a lot of things is just thinking of being closer to the lower string. I mean, if you're not doing that already, that can be very beneficial. So the difference between like this and this can often make a difference. So fourth finger, I would always... Yeah, and then also getting into the habit of testing all of those tricky situations. Like if I was doing that and it was a problem, instead of repeating it 10 times, I would, you know, instead of doing that, and I would play it as a double stop. You know, and if you have a double stop, it's guaranteed that you're able to clear that string. So now you kind of know what it feels like. Yeah. Do you ever play with fingers like really on the tips, kind of straight up?
Yeah.
Because I know there's kind of flat fingers. Do you change like flat or straight up, or are you kind of you try to keep it in one direction?
So flat comes very naturally for me, which means that I need to spend a lot more time doing the thing that is not natural, because that's the thing that will perhaps help me get to the next level, right? And so because flat is just so natural for, especially for longer fingers, I think, then being able to curve, especially the pinky, because if the pinky is curved, the other fingers will find their comfort. But if the first finger is somewhat curved, then the pinky will be absolutely straight. So for me, a curved pinky means extremely curved first finger that almost touches the string downward as opposed to like this. And yeah, so, but the fingers are applying weight in the same direction, no matter whether they're flat or... what I want to have happen is I want for my falling finger, for the dropping finger, to touch the string, to have a love affair with the string and not with the fingerboard. Because many people just drop heavy fingers on the fingerboard and they, as a side effect, perhaps touch the string too. But I want the finger to touch the string more than anything else. And if I make sure that this happens, whether the finger is extremely curved or very flat, then I know that I'm using my technique efficiently. Otherwise, you're using a lot of weight and perhaps even pressure, but you're applying that pressure to the fingerboard, and the fingerboard, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're stopping the string quickly and fully. So focusing on having an interaction with the string as opposed to having an interaction with the fingerboard. If you touch the fingerboard, that's totally fine. But the knock on the fingerboard is not the thing that stops the string.
Interesting. I never thought of it that way. I mean, this is of course related to the topic of, you know, overpressing and just finding how much of this force is even necessary to create a good sound. And it makes me think of one exercise I like to do. Like people talk about playing with harmonic level pressure, you know. But I think the problem with that as an exercise is it's so far removed from the sensation of normal playing. I'm not sure how useful it is. And so what I've tried to do is kind of establish an absolute maximum pressure. Let's say it's harmonic level pressure. And within that, I'm trying to hit the string or the fingerboard as hard as possible. But there's a limit, and that limit is harmonic. So it's kind of another way of saying that is trying to do harmonic level pressure, but retaining articulation as much as possible. Because the harmonic level, when you ask someone to do that, it's usually like everything looks like weak and kind of like it's not real playing. So. You know, so trying to still retain the strength, I find that really knocks some sense into me. Because one of my bad habits is, you know, overpressing sometimes. That's something I've worked on a lot. What sorts of things do you do or suggest for people that have that kind of overpressing instinct?
I like to remember that making a fist is one of the first things that babies learn how to do. And they become really, really good, like surprisingly good at making fists and actually holding on to objects pretty tightly. Even with their weak muscles, this is such a strong instinct to make a fist. So for me, the dropping of any finger should be just a trace of that. So I have a dynamometer in the other room which shows me my grip strength, right? Because this is also something that I like to track over
What's your
time.
max?
It's way more than it should be, because when I was little I used to have these squeezy things around with like the little springs. And when I was young, I don't even know how old, maybe 7 or 8 years old, I started squeezing these things. So my grip strength is off the book. I mean, I can hang, like I can do a dead hang over there on that pull-up thing for a long, long time. But I think that what we need is just a fraction of a percent of that every time that we drop a finger, right? So it's very, very little. However, it should still be a part of that motion, it should not be another motion. It's not a finger going this way. It's not a finger going this way. It's just the closing of a fist. Very simple. So if anyone just tried to close their fists, and then that is the motion of, it's such a natural thing, we shouldn't make it any less natural than it already is. So with that in mind, I want to keep the hand, the fingers looking the way they do when I'm closing a fist, but that means that the elbow and the wrist and the position of the shoulder need to make it easy so that the fingers can fall just that same way as if I'm closing a fist onto the string. So if the elbow is not helping, this is, I mean, you know, I remember when I was younger, and I'm sure your teachers have told you the same thing, get the elbow out, right? So when they say that, I was like, that's going to hurt, it doesn't feel comfortable. But this is so that it can make sure that even the fourth, and especially the third and the fourth finger, they can fall down in a natural way as opposed to having to reach. Because this is not closing of a fist, and this will have no inherent power unless you put too much power into it, and then you get all kinds of problems. So that's why having a base knuckle line that is somewhat parallel to the neck of the violin helps, because it establishes this type of thing as opposed to this type of thing. And that can only be done not from the fingers, but from the larger structures, getting yourself around to there. Mm-hmm. And maybe the violin setup, maybe chin rest, shoulder rest help as well, I don't know.
Do you feel like, I feel like the fist motion, making a fist, at least in part, involves this, which, shouldn't we get away from this? Or do you see that there is some of this in the motion, not just bass fingers?
There is some of this in the motion. We can't just do it all the way from the bass knuckle, because no one is that precise. You can't get yourself in that type of position where, I mean, maybe if you established the set of intervals and then you just did this only from the bass knuckle, then that'll be okay. But every once in a while, you're going to have to reach just a little bit more, and then this motion will give you some, it'll lend you some forgiveness. And that's why it's a little too unrealistic to expect for the motion to come only from the bass joints.
Right.
But the bass joints they're the primary driver, of course.
Yeah, I guess. I mean, what the difference between that is just the level of control of the finger.
Exactly.
You can't do that from the bass very easily. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Okay, let's look at some other things in the chat here. There was definitely something about Schumann scherzo here. Yeah, there was I can't find it now, but there was a question about like intonation in Schumann scherzo. Yeah, Victor is asking, listen to your Schumann scherzo recording on Instagram, and it's the cleanest I've ever heard. Any tips on how to achieve such clarity in the left and right hands, especially for that passage? Oof.
Yeah, so that excerpt is particularly difficult because of the semitone between 1 and 2. And the other thing that makes it difficult is that it's a lot of it is based on diminished, like a fully diminished arpeggio, and fully diminished means that you're going to have a low 2 and a high 2 on a neighboring string, or low 4 and a high 4 on the neighboring string. And that makes it difficult to work with fifths, almost no fifths there, right? And of course, it's difficult that it's, quarter note equals 144. That's also not great. But, I mean, if you're working on that excerpt, just go to my website and download it. The free download code is inner piece, one word. This is going to work for any of the exercises there. Just download it and practice it. And my idea with these exercises was not just to make the excerpts easier, but for people to learn how to make their own exercises for whatever else they're playing. And yeah, it's difficult, but I would also say that, so we have 3 ways of working on intonation, right? The first reason that we play out of tune is because we are not hearing the things either correctly or we're not fast enough in hearing things. So slowing down definitely works miracles. You can play with a drone, you can play with the open string. With something like the Schumann scherzo, you can turn every single string crossing into a double stop, as you suggested earlier with the 4 and 1 when you're crossing strings in a scale-like passage. There are plenty of opportunities to do double stops in this. And so that's the first reason. The first reason is we're not hearing things quickly or well enough. That's easily mended because all of us have good enough ears. A very small percent of the population has a condition called amusia, which is the musical equivalent of color blindedness, but those people also can't tell who is calling on the phone. I think that they just have a very difficult time processing pitch, but none of us who are ever interested in playing a musical instrument probably have this, because we wouldn't be drawn to a musical instrument if that were the case. So everyone has good ears, just go and use them in slow tempos. So the ear is the first reason. The second reason, and as my very good friend Igor says, he says, if you hear very well, you can play in tune in slow tempos. In order to play in tune in fast tempos, you have to have a consistent hand position. And that's exactly right. I think if you flop, flat fingers, you can play in tune in a slow tempo, but as soon as you speed it up, you won't be able to reach some of these notes. So for that, you will need a hand position that gives you equal access without having to move the bass joints very much. So if you get into a position that somehow allows you to keep the bass joints in the same place, then you have equal access to all the notes in that particular position, then you're guaranteed to be able to play the Schumann scherzo at a faster tempo. And then the third reason is that we play out of tune is that we are a little too tolerant of mistakes. Of course, we have to deliver a musical product and we can't dig into intonation for too long because it's not just an abstract exercise of intonation, although sometimes I wish it were. But you have to go on stage, you have to play it at an audition, you have to play it at a lesson, so you have to say, okay, enough for today, let me work on some musical stuff as well, I can't just play slowly. But we do have to spend a good amount of time every day making sure that it's as perfect as you can make it, and then after that run through. Then as perfect as you can make it, and then after that run through again. And so some people are just a little too tolerant of mistakes. So just maybe changing where that balance, where you see that balance. I remember when I was little, I used to listen to all these recordings that now, when I listen to them now, I find them to be so out of tune, but I adored them when I was younger. My ears
Such
didn't
as?
change, right? And so I'm not gonna say any
Give me
names here. No.
Wait, but who's releasing out-of-tune recordings? I mean, come on. It's so...
Oh, really?
Anyway.
I will DM you right after this.
I guess these
But
days, but yeah.
Yeah, well, I was younger a long, long time ago, remember? And so when... But this is also, you're bringing up a very good point. None of the recordings that we ever listen to are perfect. And yet some of them are just so beautiful that you can overlook all kinds of stuff. And this is an important point, I think. That we can't just keep working until it's technically perfect, because it never will be. So does that mean we should never perform it?
Yeah. Yeah, very true. What you said made me think about, we're talking about the frame, and I'm on the fence of, how optimized we can make a frame. I think about cellists and bass players who, they don't have a frame like we do because they can't play a scale like we can without moving. Like they have to adjust, and whether that means shifting or like extreme pivoting, to have to reach the same thing. But they do it, and they do it clean, and they do it fast. If they're, there's bass players that just do amazing things. And I just wonder, how do you do that? Like, you don't have a frame. Everything is being pivoted, and, they found that efficiency. And so I'm always wondering where the balance is between, like, optimizing something like that versus allowing for this, for the swimming, intelligent swimming. But yeah, certainly at a high speed, many things are impossible if you don't have a reliable frame. And like Schumann scherzo, so I guess back to what the questioner asked, one of the things I might try, and this is something I actually got from Hilary Hahn, is this idea of like fast motions in a slow tempo. Like, it doesn't matter how slowly I play. Both left and right hand are trying to make changes as quickly as possible. And I feel like, in my experience at least, that's been one of the keys to fast playing, is to kind of diminish the size of all sorts of changes. Like, I like to visualize like a note, and then there's a change, and then there's like note, change, and that change could be anything. Change of a note, string crossing, bow change, like these are all changes. And I'm trying to like squeeze the changes to be minimal and expand the note. And you can't do that in a fast tempo. You can't. You just, and so that's something that I found helped me a lot. Is that, you probably do similar things and maybe have a different way of approaching it. Like, what's your take on it?
I say, I say it differently, but it does exactly the same thing. I just ask my students to hear the notes for as long as possible without slowing down the tempo. So they are playing at a slow tempo or a medium tempo. Without slowing down the tempo, hear the notes for longer. And that does exactly what it is. It minimizes the noise that happens when you drop and lift. And
Yeah.
it also helps them listen to the actual quality of that dash between the dots, if you're thinking of it as in Morse code.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting if you take Hilary Hahn's recordings. She's such a great example. I only reach for those recordings to prove a point. Okay, no.
Yeah.
If you slow them down, they kind of still work.
Yeah.
Like it's still clean.
Yeah.
Her 0.75 speed is still like the changes are cleaner than ours. So
Yeah.
that's the work. But then what I was also thinking is on the flip side of it, like I wonder what you think about this. But when it's lyrical music, I feel like so many of those rules go out the window. And the older I get, the more I start to throw them out of the window, just in terms of like readiness of a frame. I used to play in a way that like, okay, fourth finger is kind of ready in case I need it. But nowadays, I'm more just whatever. Whatever makes that finger sound good, because at this tempo, you can have some forethought and a pivot when it's necessary. But like, I don't know anyone that can do like a really beautiful portamento without kind of sacrificing the frame. I can't do it. I'm like doing... Four is not even close to ready. I don't know, dude. Is that something you think about?
I think of frame differently now than I did 10 years ago. For me, it's the flexibility is the frame. The stiffness, even if it looks like a frame, is not able to actually accommodate all the fingers. Because each finger needs its own special thing to happen. And so I actually have... Oh, it started to rain again. This is wonderful. We really need it.
Wow.
The hand needs to accommodate almost everything. And I have an exercise that I do that helps me kind of relearn every day what the structure of the hand is, what the frame actually is. It's like a mountain climber that is hanging onto something but can move around that thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if I were here and all my fingers, in order to hold on to that wall, all my fingers needed to be in one position, but my entire arm also needed to be in that position, then I wouldn't be able to make the next step up the mountain, right? So I need the fingertips to be nicely solid while everything else around them swims. I'll show you what I mean. It looks really weird, by the way. And
I mean, it makes perfect sense. It's like a sort of leveraging and pivoting and
yeah. Let me know if this is... Did I turn on the original sound correctly?
I think it sounds good, yeah.
You can hear an actual note? Okay, good.
Oh, yeah.
So, for a scale like, let's say, simple scale, 2 octaves, A major. That's my go-to thing. I want to be able to play everything like this. If I can't do it, even vibrato, you know. And then eventually, of course, I get rid of all the extra motions and then I start to get precision. But I don't want to start with the precision. I don't want to start with an acupuncture, you know. I want to start with a jackhammer at first. And the fingers are very light, you know. I'll try to describe to you this feeling that I have. I was just talking about it to a student. So I started getting into archery just a little bit, and it's so interesting when you're holding the string, right, with the right hand, and you release. If you release too quickly, then one of the fingers is going to end up moving before the other. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let's imagine that you're holding it with just two fingers. Of course, it's not just two fingers. There is a lot of other stuff happening there. But what you should end up thinking is that you let the arrow. It seems so philosophical, but I'll tell you exactly how it works in practical sense. You should let the arrow shoot itself. Mm-hmm. But what really that means is that you, like with a skilled archer, you will know within which 2-second period the arrow is going to shoot itself, because the arrow pushes the, I mean, this is the string, right? It pushes the finger until there is critical mass of meat, and then at one point it just escapes, which means that you didn't do it on purpose, because if you do it on purpose, then you will disturb the angle of the string, and then the arrow is not going to go where you had been aiming for it. So similarly with the string, what I want to do is...
Oh, it's like a pizzicato, right? You can kind of do the same thing.
Yeah, right. So if I apply the weight straight down and nowhere else, which is great conceptually, if I applied it straight down, then my entire hand position is now engaged with keeping this thing the way it is, because as soon as I move away from it, I lose the string one way or the other, right? So instead of doing that, I'm thinking of course you have to stop the string, so the string should eventually touch the fingerboard, especially if you're in first position, because up here you can get away with all kinds of stuff. But in first position, you know, you should touch the fingerboard. But if I were applying the weight only straight down, then I wouldn't be able to move my finger or my hand position alter so that I can, you know, go from here to here, from here to here, to make all kinds of extensions. I wouldn't be able to have that flexibility. So instead, I'm not pulling directly to the side, because if it's directly to the side, then you're not touching the fingerboard, and then only air is stopping the string on one side. Mm-hmm. So what I want is, I want just a slight angle towards this side of my hand, right? Just a little bit. And that's why I start with a very, very light hand that still catches the string a little bit. And then from here on, I start to go closer and closer to the fingerboard. But it's still, I treat the fingerboard like a touch screen. Like if you're touching an iPad, you don't need to press. I mean, sometimes you get upset because it's not working, so you press more. But with this, it should just be like a touch screen and no more than that. And once you hook onto the string, like a little tree frog with its big paddles, it just hooks onto the surface of the tree.
Yeah.
Once you hook onto it, then you're stuck there, and then there is absolutely no pressure at all. And then you do the same thing with the next finger. And what I like to do is I like to play with the space between the bass joint and where I'm touching the string. So if I'm here, I would get closer, I would get further, I would get closer and further until I find the optimal point at which the finger is strongest, most relaxed, and also can vibrate with the greatest amplitude if I needed it. So for me, that usually means that my bass joint is going to be rather close to where the finger is. I can do the same thing from here too, but I have more freedom here. And whatever I can do with the other fingers so that I can accommodate the fourth finger, that is my dream. Like the fourth finger is the one that I want to feed the most, feed the healthiest, and take the most care of. The other fingers will solve themselves, at least in my hand.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And this kind of dynamic quality of the frame, you know, and I think a lot of people confuse the word frame for something that's rigid. And maybe in some sense it is, but I think it's mostly not. It reminds me of the fact that we are water and we're not silicone, you know? Mm-hmm. Like, part of the dynamic quality of this experimentation, as you said, you kind of do that until you find something that feels right. And the feeling right is a combination of like various factors. Maybe you're not even thinking of them separately, but you know, you have a feeling you're aiming towards, and then you know when you have it. And I think that concept exists in so many different areas of playing, like with bowing as well. Like I have this exercise that I like to do, or like I like to give to students, called Dance Around the Bow, where you kind of do something like this and try to keep the bow
do this
steady.
every day. This is it's my favorite thing to do for the right hand. I like to move my shoulder around.
Oh, I should try the shoulder thing. I don't do the shoulder.
You realize where the weight actually comes from.
Yeah, and if you could do that in a way where it's not just random, so like try to keep the bow steady, or as you did, like try to have a good sound with this kind of thing. But it's this kind of defining boundaries, the quality of defining boundaries, and I think that's what we're doing with vibrato as well. Like it's always clear to me if someone's vibrating, like whether they will be able to slow it down if they needed to, or if I ask them to, like. I would do scale. I think it's important to be able to do that, maybe even with a metronome, although that's kind of next level. And a lot of people have this problem where like they can turn vibrato on, but they can't do it slow. And that will come out when you play real music, because real music requires kind of, ideally, in beautiful music, you have all kinds of variations in vibrato. So this kind of dynamic quality. And another thing, what you said reminded me of what cellists talk about. It's like they're not doing this. They're kind of, and it's so kind of demonstrative with a bigger thing. Like you can really feel like and they're pulling back. And it's this kind of arm leverage. And I do feel some of that is active here. It's funny, Kersen Leong, right? This violinist. Mm-hmm. He, very, very gifted player, and he kind of demonstrates it when he plays. Like you can actually see his process, like similar to what we're describing. He actually, maybe he's done it so much that it's part of his playing now on stage. He's always like bouncing around, and whether that looks natural or not is up to debate, but it certainly works, and you see that in action, this kind of dynamic quality.
Yeah, it should be dynamic. I think the frame is on this side of the hand. As long as everything is nicely curved, as long as we're not playing like this, then we are exerting an actual frame. And the flexibility of it is what makes it strong. Because there has to be a hook involved, like with any of the bigger instruments that you mentioned. We need to have a hook, but I think this is like, it's a natural thing for every area of expertise that's physical. Doesn't matter if it's running, biking, boxing, or even typing on a computer.
Yeah. Yeah, that archery example is perfect because it's like the thing you don't want is to anticipate the explosion. The explosion happens randomly within a given period of time.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating how that works. Pietro is here with us. And he says, Moni's absolutely right about the archery. Heifetz in slow motion video is a good source of actually seeing how the hand moves. Yeah, that slow motion Heifetz video.
This is the Scherzo Tarantella, right?
Yeah. I'm going to try to bring that up, actually.
Yeah.
Okay, ready? You might not see it, but...
It's okay.
So I'm showing it now, and what I remember is that there's like... The fingers are falling like this, kind of. Like you don't get the feeling that they're being thrown. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway. So let's see. We have some other questions here. We've been going for an hour and a half. Do you have a cutoff?
No.
All right, here comes another 4-hour stream, people. Just kidding. Marius asks, what's your opinion on starting violin in 4th position? I've seen an interview with Augustin Hadelich, and he said that his father, a cellist, taught him violin starting from the 4th position. Yeah, I guess this is kind of old school idea of reaching back and like there's no shifting, almost like this kind of thing. But he's such an interesting case because he has no contact point here ever, really.
Yeah, almost never. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I've never thought about that, but there are a few things that I think are important to remember when it comes to starting something. We've all started it, so we can restart it, right? But what we could do is realize what the difficult things are and start there. So, for example, I think a bigger problem for violinists is that we start with the first finger on the string. And if we were to start with the 4th finger on the string, and if we even named the finger 1, 2, 3, 4, then we would end up with a much better position, because now if you tell a violinist to start a piece, the first thing they do, doesn't matter what piece it is, they just put the first finger on the string, because that's the finger that's closest to the thumb. But because it's closest to the thumb, it's also very, very strong. It's in terms of leverage, is very strong because it is the closest to also the neck. And the 4th finger, not only the shortest, not only has the smallest fingertip, but is the weakest, is the farthest from the thumb. So we should start with that in mind. And I think also with scales, for example, we start every scale in 1st position or whatever position we start, and then we go all the way up and then we come back down. I think just for a week, everyone should practice scales starting in the highest note, going back down and then going back up and then finishing the scale. And another thing is that we practice, I don't know, maybe 80% more shifts going up than going down. And then when students are like, well, I'm feeling uncomfortable shifting down, there is nothing to wonder about. It's just because we don't play enough shifts going down. We play plenty of shifts going up. I mean, if you think of a normal scale, let's say G major, you're going to shift up 3 times and you're going to shift down 2 times. And this is a control. This is like the most controlled form of exercise, right? It's a scale. Yeah. Think about pieces though. Every piece has a scale or an arpeggio or a melody leading up. And then when you play the highest note, what do? You reset. You go back down. That's not a shift. You don't exercise an actual shift. So I think what Marius is saying about starting in 4th position, you probably, by doing that, you are preempting a lot of difficulties that would happen for a violinist once they get past Suzuki Book 6, when they start playing in the weird positions, you know? And if you start that way, at least you're familiar with some of the most difficult stuff that you'll have to play on the violin, even in the easiest pieces. But what you mentioned about being able to go up and down without really shifting, just with extending the first finger down, then I think that's wonderful as well, because every extension of the first finger down is not just extending the first finger down, but also getting the elbow to accommodate this extension, so that you don't just curve this thing here, but you make it straight. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that comes so much in handy, like when playing tenths, especially in lower positions.
Yes.
At one point, I had or somebody told me, or maybe I realized it, but that, don't start a tenth
Yeah.
from one and then reach four, but reaching down, I mean, it's like a breath of fresh air. I mean, even with thirds, like when I go, this is not quite first position for me. I don't know. I feel like I'm still kind of in this fourth position, not fourth position, second position land.
Second,
but not
least,
quite first. Yeah.
So children, go with the fourth finger. Go with the fourth finger, and then when in doubt, stay with the fourth finger. You will. The other fingers will not be too complainy about being extended further back or having to fold a little too much. As long as the fourth finger is comfortable, the whole hand's going to be happy.
May the fourth be with you. There's, we have a question about vibrato from Jay Moran. He says he chatted with you about a vibrato exercise from Silverstein. Is there something like that that comes to mind?
Yeah, Silverstein used to do a lot of these kinds of things. And I think it's good exercise not just for that lateral flexibility, which we don't use very much. I mean, we have the up and down pretty well, but the left and right we don't use as much, and it's also very good for intonation control. But it's also good for releasing of the finger, because we're definitely not doing this. There's a release. You release for a tiny bit, and then the finger teleports into the new position. And I don't do it with the hand. I do it with just the finger. So I try to have my hand stay in one position. As well. I don't do this because it's too, then I have to hold the violin. I don't want to hold the violin. But yeah, so having a little bit of a release like this really helps. And I think that this is, the third and perhaps most important quality of a high quality vibrato is the ping, the ability to release when you're at the lower point of the vibrato and establish a stronger contact when you're at the higher point of the vibrato. And that type of it really helps with it's almost like you're doing an internal trill within the vibrato, but of course the finger doesn't leave the string.
I see. Yeah, Silverstein had such a beautiful vibrato. It had this, I don't know, I feel like a lot of vibrato I hear these days is like a perfectly nice back and forth. And even when it's really good, it's just, there's this cleanliness to it. And then with someone like Silverstein and some other old school players, like there's this little kink in it. There's a variation. There's like a little impulsive quality. Yeah. It's not just this being done at X speed. It's not linear. Yeah,
for sure. Exactly right. I didn't know how to describe that in words, but you said it exactly right. I have a recording of, it's on YouTube maybe, Silverstein playing the Strauss Capriccio. I'm second violin, Silverstein's first. Yeah, someone put, it's like done with an iPhone, and you can only see my shoes, and maybe every once in a while you can see my unorthodox left hand. But you can see Silverstein very, very clearly. And we all tried to imitate his vibrato that day, and maybe we failed, but it was such a good exercise to just listen, because I've played with him a few times, but this is the only one that I actually have a recording from, and it was just so shimmery on every finger and omnipresent, even in the fastest of notes, even during shifts. It was just so effortless and light that it never seemed to bother the phrase. It was never heavy enough for him to try to vibrate. The fingers were so light that the vibrato just happened, And this is, when we get into the argument, should we vibrate every note? No, we shouldn't vibrate every note, but you know what? You should be able to vibrate every note if you needed to. And if you can't, then that's a problem. Because if you're able to vibrate every note, even at medium to fast tempos, then that shows that the technique is free enough for you to decide where to vibrate, rather than say, well, these two notes, I don't want to vibrate for expressive purposes, while they're just a little difficult to vibrate, and that's why you choose not to. And I'm not saying that we have to be absolutists in that way. Sometimes we do have to make technical deficiencies seem like musical virtues, but I think with vibrato, in a controlled environment, you should be able to get that done.
Yeah, I remember something I was obsessed about for a little while, like when I was really I'm always working on my technique, but there was a time when I just kind of felt like I was redoing everything. And I would often use vibrato kind of as a diagnostic tool, like even if I wouldn't vibrate. And that's what got me to start vibrating scales. And I think we should mostly play scales with vibrato. And the way I imagined Silverstein's vibrato, as opposed to this kind of thing that's applied to a note, like how do we integrate the vibrato into the actual mechanism of the left hand, like into the actual playing of a note with the left hand. Mm-hmm. And it's this kind of, I think Zvi Zeitlin called it like a little earthquake. And you hear this like impulse. It's combined with the articulation, like they are in partnership. And that way also, what I discovered was that the note will start on the note, not on some upper or lower swing. And I think that could sound out of tune. And so if you have this on independently, and you might hear like intonation is just, there's something wrong with it, because like you start on the top of the note instead of, so. And like when I discovered this, I started listening for that in every violinist that I love. And, lo and behold, you hear Chrysler, kind of this impulse vibrato. And I think Silverstein, of course, very inspired by Chrysler, but this guy. I don't know, do you think about the vibrato connected with articulation? Or is that like illusory, or is that a real thing?
Yeah. Oh, no, it's an actual thing. I mean, I think Galamian talks about it in the book, the principles of violin playing and teaching. There is this idea where, you drop it, and then the finger does just one oscillation. And then you do drop it, as you said, you drop it on the note. And Mr. Zeitlin used to talk about, that mini earthquake. He wanted the vibrato to sizzle the way it would if you're dropping cold water on a heated pan. So
that's good.
In other words, you don't drop it and then a second later it sizzles, but you drop it, and the minute it makes contact, the very contact is what makes it sizzle. So when you're dropping a vibrating finger, then, and of course, if you drop a very heavy finger, then you have to make yourself vibrate, which means that it's not going to start right away. At least it's not a sustainable thing that you can keep controlling over and over. So it's definitely, as you said, a good gauge for how the technique is working. if the vibrato is immediate and effortless, I think then other things will start working well too.
Yeah, I mean, one of my biggest pet peeves of many modern players is that it feels like the vibrato is delayed, not for artistic reasons. Because there are artistic reasons to delay a vibrato. Like I don't know, there's all kinds of stuff. But like when you do, I can't even do it. But like this, just kind of, it's not even music anymore. It's just like you're playing a tune. Like I don't feel the instrument disappearing. You're just reminding me that there's this thing exists and there's all these techniques involved in it. Like you're just.
That is right. You're supposed to forget when you're watching a movie. You're supposed to forget that there is a person with a microphone standing in the back and another person holding the lights and the person sitting in a chair about to say cut, and you're supposed to feel like you're transported into a different scene. Same thing with us. I think when you're listening to Bach, you shouldn't hear chords. You should hear multiple voices that happen to take place at the same time rather than chord, 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 chord. And then as soon as you do hear that very violin articulation on the chords, if it's done incorrectly or the way you would play a chord in Paganini, then you are reminded that it's no longer a choir of angels. It's just a wooden instrument with a slightly skilled person playing it,
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about string crossings. Like, how do you approach, like, let's say, opening of Tchaikovsky? I think a lot of people, this is just, it's actually similar to what was mentioned in the comments about the finger not touching the next string, and often that happens with 4. So like, how would you work on that with someone, particularly just these string crossings, for example, in the Tchaikovsky?
I personally practice every string crossing as a double stop. Every string crossing as a double stop. Now, even if it's very, very easy. I'm just so used to doing it. And you do it in monophonic movements of Bach, like the G minor presto and the D minor jig, and even in the D minor allemande. Every single string crossing, you do it as a double stop. Even if it's a fifth, you still do it as a double stop. Helps with intonation, but definitely helps with string crossings. I did a couple of videos on, very short videos on scales with that as well. If you have 4 strings, if you're playing the scale across 4 strings, then you have 3 string crossings on the way up, 3 string crossings on the way down, and each one of them should be a double stop. And if you want to make it easy for yourself, you do the double stop on the second note of the string crossing. If you want to make it difficult for yourself, then you do the double stop on the first note. It's more realistic to do the double stop on the second note of the string crossing.
You mean this? Going back to the D after you've played the E?
No. So I would do this. So I don't actually disturb the rhythm. I try to make it exactly as it is in the piece. I just add a double stop without adding an extra note. Just do the double stop on the second note of the string crossing.
Yeah.
And that can work in pieces as well. And the magic of it is that if you do it 10 times in a row, you no longer have to think about it. Because if you think about it, then that becomes one more thing that distracts you from making music. But all you need to do is just 10 times, and then you no longer have to think about it. The hand now accommodates the 2 fingers peacefully coexisting. Well, there is also one more thing here. Let me see how I can explain it better. All right, I got it. If you have to coordinate 2 events, it's difficult to do. When I remember when I first got my mom a computer, she thought that she needed to push shift and then the capital letter, and then it becomes big. But she didn't know that she could push shift and hold it down at the end of the letter. She thought that she needed to push both of them at the same time. And then, of course, 50% of the time shift is first, and 50% of the time the letter is first, and you know. So it's the same thing here. If crossing the string is contingent upon you lifting the previous finger, the chance that you're going to cross with the bow and lift the previous finger at the same time is very low. In mathematical probabilities, that's a very, very difficult thing to achieve, to be able to lift the previous finger and cross with the bow at the same time. So why not establish a left hand that allows the bow to cross whenever the bow wants to cross? Right? So, and even something like this. Just, I don't know if the microphone can catch any of those intricacies, but I'm going to show it twice the same way and then twice a different way.
Yeah, it's
what
clear.
we hear now, yeah, it's not just that it's clear, but there is a common...
I mean, the
vibrato.
difference is clear.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So the oscillation of the vibrato doesn't change because it's one vibrato. And the other thing is that if we listen carefully, we hear the end of the E during the C sharp, which means that the notes are absolutely connected because one hasn't even stopped sounding when the other one starts. The reverberance within the violin of the E is still present when the C sharp starts. So why not do this with scales, as you just showed earlier? Because lifting the finger will create some sort of inconsistency within the sound. It may even shake the violin in a way that we don't want. I think it's just good violin technique to keep the fingers down through string crossings. And it's good for the left hand position. If you can't do it, if it's very difficult to do, that means that you just need to change something here to be able to accommodate. Because if the fourth finger, for example, if the fourth finger is touching the upper string, then yeah, you can do the string crossing that way. Then you're going to have to lift it. But even if you lift it in time, it's just not a great fourth finger to begin with for articulation of that note.
Yeah, that's definitely a coping mechanism.
Yeah.
But for every rule, you know, you'll find someone who sounds amazing.
Yeah, sure,
but
of course.
That's the danger. But yeah, another thing that I it goes along with what you said is just what's happening in the right hand. Because I know a lot of people that kind of get this idea of double stops and, you know, this overlapping of the fingers as you were talking about. But then how does that actually work in the right hand? A lot of people... like they still feel this angular thing, like note, note.
Oh,
okay, now there's a double stop.
Okay.
You know, so there's like, okay, now I also have to kind of... No, so that's... And it's not at the same time. And so how do you like coordinate all that? Difficult.
Well, the string crossing in the right hand is a little bit more of a game of trust. Like you have to have trust that you're going to get to the next string. So if the bow were moving like this from the G string to the E string, it can do a perfect rainbow and eventually it'll touch each one of the strings. We don't have to do tam, pom, 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 right? So we do this and then eventually it gets there. But I think that the younger player or the less experienced player just needs to have faith that you're going to get to the next string in this small motion, as opposed to making it into an angular motion, because then you get an accent. Of course you get to the next string, but you'll get to the next string in an undesirable way. And it's a little bit kind of like holding on to the
I was just going to say, it's exactly like the archery example. Yeah.
Yeah. It gets there at some point.
Yeah, and it's almost a priority. Like there's two sides from which to look at this from. One side is like, let's say auditory, like I need to hear the next note at a certain time. And then the other side of it is physical. Like I'm doing this motion that hits that note, and then whatever the motion is will hit the next note. And a lot of people are focused on, their expectation of a certain note coming, and it needs to come at this time. And so that's my primary thing. And then the physical is secondary. It's a slave to the auditory. So I'm just going to do what I need to do physically to get to that note on time. And so that's where the angular thing comes from, I think. And part of what you're talking about just letting it happen, and this archery thing where there's like some stochastic quality to it, is that if you prioritize the physical in the practice room and allow it to happen maybe at the wrong time, maybe it's late, maybe it's early, but the right physical thing happened and the right quality of sound happened, it was just not at the right time, that's easy to fix. Then you just do the same motion. Once you have the motion, do it a little different, and it'll come earlier or later. And that's something that's very interesting, like always going back to how it feels rather than how it sounds. Not like quality of sound, but like getting out of notes, getting out of kind of expectation of a melody, like when we're working on the mechanics of something, and just seeing how a physical motion will manifest itself in sound, and then that's information.
This
It's very philosophical.
brings the topic of what technique actually is,
Right.
And I remember when I was younger, I had a view of technique that is probably shared by many people listening to us today. I thought that technique was to be able to play fast and clean, maybe to some extent loud too, but fast and clean was what good technique meant, right? So this is a little bit going back to the topic of what we can measure, how we want to measure the things that we care about, but we end up caring about only the things that we measure easily. And so measuring tempo, easy. Measuring which piece is harder, also easy. Measuring cleanliness, also kind of easy, right? Size of sound, easy. Measuring how it feels, not very easy. Because the interoception, that ability to be able to tell what it feels like in every muscle, in every, that's outsourced into the future. You get tendonitis years from now. You get arthritis, maybe when you're much older, you get back problems 2 weeks from after you started to sit incorrectly. So in martial arts and in sports, good technique doesn't mean doing big work. So someone can lift 400 pounds as a deadlift, right? With bad technique. If they're very strong, they'll be able to do that. And a little kid can pick up this pen from the floor using correct technique. Coincidentally, the same exercise as a deadlift, but in one of them, the person lifts 400 pounds incorrectly. In the other one, a little kid picks up a pen correctly. The little kid has the better technique. But unfortunately, if you go to a concert and someone's playing Preludium and Allegro and they're doing everything technically correctly with no effort, and someone plays the Last Rose of Summer and they're tensing up but they sound decent, people will assume that the person who is playing the Last Rose has a more advanced technique. When in fact they may simply have been practicing a lot more, or just played the violin 20 years longer, or decided to sacrifice comfort and future success for this one performance. So technique doesn't mean playing difficult things. It means playing anything with ease, even just 2 consecutive notes that are in tune and beautiful.
Yeah, no, that's a very important point. And it's also why I think Mozart is easy for beginners and very difficult for professionals.
Yeah, that's right.
When your standard is these easily measurable things, sometimes there's very little going on in the notes per se. But there's a comment from Jay Moore, and I wonder if I remember wrong, but there's an impression that Galamian said in his book to cross strings sort of fast to get a clear sound, or is that just when it's fast music? Yeah, there's different situations where you certainly want that angular quality. I think we're more talking about the connective the connective tissue. Let me see, I'll get through maybe one or two more comments and then slowly need to wrap up. Pietro says, old school such as Milstein, but you can see it in Kersen too. You can see the fingers lying more on the pad and basically being diagonal down, not that vertical as most of us play sometimes. Yeah, there's, you know, Sergei Krylov, very flat fingers.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
People do this kind of thing. I remember, I'm still experimenting with that all the time, but
As long as people can play thirds, it doesn't really matter.
yeah, that is a good test, isn't it?
Yeah.
But I think when Krylov plays thirds, he adjusts. Like he doesn't have this, he's already said goodbye to like this really stable hand frame that kind of works in many situations. I think he's always kind of tweaking it a little left, a little right. And I'm nervous watching him play sometimes, but it just sounds great. And like there's this computer running in there and it's like tweaking things. It's so much fun. Yeah. Before we finish, I wanted to ask you what your desert island recordings are, if you have any.
I think from the standpoint of learning and continuing to learn how to use my hands efficiently, I would probably continue to listen to Kevin Zhu's Wieniawski Faust Fantasy. I think about half of the views of that recording are from my various devices. And
Amazing. Kevin Zhu, yeah. I think I know that recording. Is that where he does this? He goes, and then, he does, instead of,
Yes. Yeah. It's a wonderful
he's
one.
amazing. His Bartok is fantastic also.
Yeah.
It's interesting you went first to like the recordings that you would continue to study.
Yeah.
What about ones that
I
just
also-
live here?
Oh, okay. Well,
Your
let's see
top three.
what lives there. It'll probably be one of the pentatonics recordings, and this is not even a violin, but it's just their sense for pitch, drama, and synchronicity is wonderful. Almost any of the pentatonics recordings. But,
I have to look at.
I
I have to
think-
listen to that.
yeah. It's a wonderful a cappella group, and I think one of the recordings has maybe now 700 million views on YouTube. Anyways,
Wow.
And then there was what was it? A cello recording. But I can't remember exactly what it was, because it's been so long since I've seen it. But these are the types of things that I would take with me. It's probably the only violin recording would be that Kevin Zhu recording, because I think we have similar size hands and I can learn so much just by studying that recording. I wish I had multiple angles so that I can see what he does with the left hand from every angle. But the other things are just, good for my own heart.
Pietro says that Kevin Zhu is going to be on his Sunday Musicians Cafe talk show.
Oh, very
So-
cool.
You'll probably tune into that, I guess.
Yeah.
And then he says his favorite is the AI cello recording on my channel. It is some of the best playing I've ever heard. Yeah. I guess for me, the Glenn Gould's Brahms Intermezzi are just, I always come back to that as such a thing of ecstasy and inspiration. And
Yeah.
I mean, make Brahms sexy again, you know? Yeah. All right, man.
Violin?
What? Violin? What? Heifetz Korngold. I mean, it's up there.
Yeah. Oh.
It's just
I remember the
such-
first time I heard that. Yeah.
Yeah. There's too many, but that's one. Yeah. And young recordings of Menuhin, very inspiring for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Kevin Zhu's Faust Fantasy. Yeah. Awesome. Well, what do you got coming up next? What's on the docket for you?
A little chamber music, Prokofiev G concerto. I'm playing Tabula Rasa with Midori over the summer.
Nice.
Arvo Pärt. I don't know what else. Oh yeah, festivals. You know, all the chamber music that we have to do at festivals is fun. Brahms Sextet, Brahms Quintet, Shostakovich, the Octet. Yeah, things like that.
Wonderful. Chamber music feeds the soul. Well, thanks again for hopping on the channel here. Everyone should check out Moni's channel, Zen Violin, zenviolin.com. Still remember when I discovered you and like some of your PDFs that are just so kind of incisive and like it's clear that there's a vision and thought put into it, and there's a lot to learn from. So I really appreciate
Thank you.
everything you're doing.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all you're doing.
I don't know about you, but I could do much more if I just kind of
we
wake
will.
up on time.
When we retire, we'll start doing so much more.
Do you feel like you're going to retire? And is that a concept that makes sense to you, like it does to normal people, or is that just like something normal people do?
No, I keep transitioning from interest to interest, but I keep the other ones on the low burner, you know? So I assume that's what retirement is going to be for me.
No. I think it's just going to be more of the same. Why does it have to change? It's just going to get slightly slower, maybe more efficient.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I hope to chat with you again sometime soon. And thanks everyone for joining. Sorry if we didn't get to all of your questions. Tried to keep track of it. Thank you for the engagement. And if you want to join my Patreon channel, we have more Zoom calls. Hopefully I'll get Moni onto one of those as well. A lot of videos there as well that I'm making. And I think we have a Zoom meetup tonight at 7. So thanks again, Moni. Take care, everybody.
Stay well. Bye, everyone.